Racism. Prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. Microaggression. A term used for brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative prejudicial slights and insults toward any group, particularly culturally marginalized groups. Implicit bias. The attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Equity. The quality of being fair and impartial. These are a few of the terms that tend to be introduced to educators in social justice-oriented professional developments. We go over terms, we read literature excerpts that analyze these terms, and we walk out feeling proud of ourselves for engaging in this important work. Social justice-oriented conversations are becoming more of a priority in schools all over the country. In these extremely confusing and polarizing political times, it has become extremely apparent to those in the education field that our nation is far from equitable for people of color. As a result of this realization, there's also been a surge in conducting professional developments and conversations about race to help close the opportunity gap that exists for our students of color. Yet, we remain stagnant in our journey to achieve racial equity. Why? Why is all of this talk not having the impact that we want? Why are schools still so incredibly segregated? Why are students of color still being targeted, ostracized, and made to feel unwelcomed in their classrooms and learning spaces? Don't get me wrong, it's not that these conversations are doing no good at all. They are allowing us to initiate dialogue, and they are helping to spread awareness. But it's not enough. So what's missing? What is resulting in our walking out of these conversations, whether in a scaffolded professional development or a more informal discussion amongst colleagues, friends, etc., without a tangible idea of how to shift our thinking, actions, and mindset that will actually result in a much-needed culture shift? I believe the problem is that we have intellectualized these conversations about racial equity so much so that we no longer feel the urgency to make the change we need. We are constantly defining terms, worried about providing language, focused on learning the content related to inequity, that we fail to stop and realize that we are dealing with human life. That the result of our inaction is another student of color dropping out. That the result of our inaction is another student's trauma that will follow them for the rest of their life. That the result of our inaction is perpetuating a system that was not fundamentally built for people of color in this country. What we need instead of definitions are stories. Stories have the power to connect us through feeling. By sharing what we have experienced, what the word trauma means to us, and what a microaggression looks like, we feel for one another. Through stories, we can share the moments that broke us down, but also the moments in which we show resilience and demonstrate the strength of the human spirit. So, let me share a story with you today. Growing up, I loved volleyball. I have never again experienced a feeling quite like the one I felt when I was immersed in the game and everything else in my world simply disappeared. For the hour and a half I was on the court with my team, all that mattered was keeping that ball from touching the ground on our side of the net. I played the position of setter, and for those of you that are unfamiliar with the sport, setter is the one who should always be hitting the ball second and sending it off to the hitter to make the final spike over the net. So I was setter, and I was good. I remember being on my high school team, a team of predominantly white girls, even though our school was incredibly diverse. And on game days, I would see the faces of all my teammates' parents, all who seemed to already know each other, cheering us on. One day, our team had just loaded the bus and we were off to an important away game. A game against our rival school, and there was excitement in the air. I took a seat in the front with a friend, and our coach was in the seat adjacent. After some conversation, he asked me, "So, are your parents excited to watch you play tonight?" He asked like he already knew the answer to the question. Of course my parents were coming to watch, and of course they were excited. I saw a perplexed look cross his face when I responded and said, "No, they actually aren't coming. They're really busy." He shared a confused chuckle and said, "What? What could be more important than their little girl's volleyball game?" I remember just letting out a bit of controlled laughter and then silently looking out the window the rest of my way there. Because the truth was, there was a lot that was more important to them than my game. My parents took priority in getting enough rest before their next laborious workday and figuring out how they were going to make ends meet. They didn't have the privilege of taking pride in their daughter's athletic capabilities. In fact, they didn't have the privilege to attend my band recitals, my elementary musicals, or even my high school graduation. It's the reality for a lot of immigrant kids and their families. Support comes in the form of providing food, shelter, and clothing. Expecting more than that from my parents would be ungrateful and selfish. It would be insulting to highlight what they couldn't give us by negating everything that they did. I looked out the window of that bus, and I remember silently crying, because in that moment, I knew I wasn't like everyone else on the bus with me. It is these moments, however, that have been seared into my memory. They are what have made me push harder to achieve all that I can. They are what have taught me that I am strong, I am resilient, and even without the things that everyone else has, I can be great. Now, I know I didn't just end racism or reveal a secret formula that educators can tap into that will magically make social justice-oriented education easy. But I hope that in the few minutes I was sharing my story, that you were able to connect to me. That in these few minutes, I wasn't a stranger in front of you, but a girl whose pain you could sympathize with. I hope that for just these few minutes, you can understand the pain I felt that day, because you have felt that kind of pain too. You see, we constantly start conversations about racial equity with recognizing positionality. We start with highlighting our differences, and more often than not, we get stuck there. The minority remains the victim, while the white person remains the one with the power. And rather than identifying this positionality, productively reflecting on it, and then actively working towards change, we dig our heels in where we are, live in the pain that those conversations have induced, and fail to make the small mental changes we need to make as a community in order to shift the culture of our society. By sharing stories, we can create a connection between those in power and those who lack it, and allow for a common ground. Additionally, we can break down barriers between students and academia and give them the tools to be able to tell their own stories, to give them the voice that doesn't just make them victims, but allows them to be active agents of change. Not just so that we can feel their pain, but so that we can participate in their triumphs. We can teach our kids that just like them, we struggled, but just like us, they will overcome.